Todos a bailar. Everybody dance. Hello. Hola. I would like to take you on a journey with me. I'm going to talk about the Lucifer Effect in action, and I want you to come on a journey from evil to the psychology of heroism. Hopefully it'll be a hot talk, and hopefully we'll spend some time in hell and some time in heaven. But one of the questions we want that has been asked for decades by philosophers, by theologians, by dramatists, is what makes people go wrong? As a child, I asked that question because I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a ghetto in South Bronx in New York. And if you grew up in the inner city, you grew up with evil all around you. And I wanted to know why my friends I knew were good went bad. So the dangerous question I want to ask is not why people go wrong. I want to up the ante. I want to know, why do good people turn evil? The reason I ask is because psychologists are really optimistic. We believe if we know how and why, if we know the mechanisms and the process, then we could begin to develop interventions maybe to prevent or minimize evil. As a child, I was also influenced by the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And if you remember the story, it's the good Dr. Jekyll invents a chemical, which when he takes it, he crosses the line between good and evil, and he becomes the evil Mr. Hyde. When the drug wears off, he goes back again across that line to become the good Dr. Jekyll. For me, what was interesting is not what was in the chemical, but was all about the line. Whoops, I'm sorry. It was all about that line. I wanted to know whether the line between good and evil is fixed and impermeable, because that's a safety. Because me and my kind were on the good side, and we don't have to worry about being seduced to the bad side. But it made me entertain the possibility, even though it was fiction, that maybe the line between good and evil is permeable. Maybe it allows movement across, so good people could be seduced into doing evil, and maybe even evil people could be rehabilitated. So I want you all to take a moment to look at this wonderful illusion by the Dutch artist M.C. Escher. Focus on the white and make the black the background. And when you do, you see a world full of angels. But now let's look more deeply. I want you to switch focus and focus on the black. And now you see a world full of devils, demons, with the horns, with the wings. And this tells me two things. It tells me that good and evil are part of the human condition. They are the dark and light aspects of human nature. They are our yin and yang. Good and evil is in all of us. Once something becomes imaginable, it becomes doable by any of us. And it also reminds me, as a little Catholic kid, of Lucifer. Lucifer was God's favorite angel. Lucifer means the light. He's also called the morning star in scriptures. We don't know what he did to become the #1 angel, but we know what he did to lose his status. He disobeyed God along with some other angels, and what God did is he got Michael the archangel to come in, overpower Lucifer and the other fallen angels, and of course with the help of God he couldn't lose. And in that instant, Lucifer goes from being the favorite angel to descend into hell as Satan, as the devil, as the force of evil in the universe. So this is the arc of the most extreme transformation imaginable. God's favorite angel becomes the devil. So given that, it sets the context for my studies over a number of years of looking at how ordinary people, not angels, first begin to engage in evil acts. So as you saw in that little clip I did with Andres, evil, a psychological definition, is really all about power. It's the exercise of power to intentionally harm people through prejudice, to hurt people through torture and other means, to kill people. And when evil is practiced by governments, by systems, it's to commit crimes against humanity. And that's where the real evil is in the universe. A few years ago, we saw this TV expose, which was shocking to the world, of American soldiers, men and women, abusing Iraqi prisoners in a prison in some place in Iraq called Abu Ghraib. I was shocked by those images, but I wasn't surprised because I had seen some of those images in the study I did many years earlier, which I'll reveal to you. The military and the Bush administration immediately said, this is the work of a few bad apples. Don't blame us. The system is good. I didn't believe that because I knew in the Stanford Prison Study, I started only with good apples. So my hypothesis was maybe the soldiers were good and it was the barrel that was bad. In order to answer that hypothesis, I needed the data, and I got it when I was invited to be an expert witness for the guard who was in charge of the night shift, Sergeant Chip Frederick. So I had access to all the images, 1,000 of them, I'm going to show you some, access to all the investigative reports, there was a dozen, and access to this man and his family. So what I want to do is our case study of evil, since evil is a vague term, I want to make it concrete. We're going to look at some of those horrific images that I've added some sound and movement to. This is digitally documented depravity. Some of the images are violent or sexual. You might want to look away. And these are all from the cameras of the United States military police. What happened is only in one place, Tier 1A, and only on the night shift, not in the day shift. So these are questions we might want to ask later on when we have a question period. So let's open the door to that dungeon and go down and see what really happened there. Abu Ghraib, Iraq prison abuses, 2003, military police guards photos. Begins with push-ups, with punching, with hitting, with stepping on people, with humiliating them, having them wear women's pants, hanging them upside down, having them in stress positions, standing on boxes for hours, putting their number in lipstick on their breast. We'll talk about him in a moment. So that pictures the iconic image of torture. And they're making high fives. They're happy. They're putting themselves in the picture. This is the first time we've seen torturers, men and women, putting themselves in the picture along with their humiliation torture. Masturbation contests, making them simulate fellatio, and treating human beings as if they were dogs. The ultimate and then using dogs to terrorize their victims. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld comes down, he says, who is responsible for these prison abuses? Who are the bad apples? Well, the question I ask, how do psychologists go about understanding these character transformations? There are three ways. The most typical way is called dispositional. We look inside the person for personality traits. In this case, we look for psychopathology. We're going to call that the bad apples. Social psychologists like me say, yeah, people are important, but you know what? We have ignored the situational forces, the specific external context, and that's the bad barrel. And what we have all ignored, all social scientists, is where the real power is, and that's the systemic. It's the broad influence, political, economic, cultural, legal, and I call those the bad barrel makers. They make the situation and they justify it and maintain it. Now, of course, they're evil people, and we call that dispositional evil. For older people in the audience, it's Stalin and it's Hitler. But is there a more modern example of dispositional evil, an evil person that everybody might agree to, at least in America? He looks like this, Vice President Dick Cheney. It says, Bush administration declares war on Canada, France, Germany, and everybody else we can. For young people, Darth Vader is the modern version of evil for the younger generation. And I met up with him recently, and it's very difficult not to fall under the spell of the dark force of evil. But I'm still trying. So here's the bad apple versus bad barrel. Here's Chip Frederick. It was his idea to put electrodes on this prisoner's hand, have him stand in a box, cover his face, and tell him that when his legs give out and he falls over, he will execute himself. And so imagine, now he didn't think it was bad because the electrodes weren't attached to electricity, but the prisoner didn't know that. And so this has become the iconic image of torture. So what kind of monster is this guy? Before he went down to that dungeon, he was an honored soldier. He got 9 medals and awards. He loves the American flag. There was not a single thing in his record that I could find over his 30 years of life that was negative. And here he is right after with his wife, good husband, good father, good citizen. And so I have to conclude, plus with a lot of other information I gathered, that it was the situation that drove this good person to do those terrible things. So the Lucifer Effect involves understanding human character transformations when ordinary people become perpetrators of evil. We have to analyze behavior always at 3 levels. The first level is, what do people bring into the situation? What does the situation bring out of people? And what is the dominant system that maintains, creates those evil-producing situations? So the Lucifer Effect, which is now in a Spanish edition, and they have it in the lobby, I'll sign copies for you tomorrow, involves my trying to understand how good people turn evil. But although the book is heavily invested in the negatives, about the Stanford prison study, about Abu Ghraib, and several chapters on all the research, some of which I'm going to present a bit of today, that show the power of the situation, I think my book really as a testimony to the human mind's infinite capacity to make any of us behave as kind or cruel, as caring or indifferent, as creative or destructive, and it pushes some of us to be villains. And you know what? The same situation pushes other of us to become heroes. And that's where we're going to take us in a moment. So we have a wonderful website I hope you will visit called lucifereffect.com. So 2 very dangerous questions were asked by my high school classmate, little Stanley Milgram, who's a little Jewish kid in the Bronx with me. He said, would you electrocute a stranger if Hitler asked you? Could the Holocaust happen in America? People said, don't be crazy. He said, how do you know unless you were in the situation? Everybody likes to think they were good people. I'm sure the Nazi youth thought the same thing. And so he did an experiment back in 1963. Many of you know about it, but before I briefly present the study, let's ask the question, why did he do this research, which many people think was the most unethical research ever done until I did my study?
I learned of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II. How is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people who are courteous and decent in everyday life can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience?
So in his study, He tested 1,000 ordinary people from 2 small towns in America. No students, men aged 20 to 50, but he also ran women in another study. And so in the study, there's a learner who has to learn material, and a teacher has to teach them the material, and the authority in their lab coat. The authority starts off as just. He wants to help people improve their memory, but over time, even though the victim, the learner, is yelling and screaming, "Let me out," he says, "We can't let him out. You have to continue to shock." So he puts pressure on the teacher to shock more and more. Evil begins with 15 volts. When you press the first button, he doesn't even feel it, and each successive increment is 15 volts, 15, 30, 45. As it escalates, the learner in the other room starts screaming, and you are good, most subjects are good, they turn to the experimenter and say, "Sir, who'll be responsible if something happened?" The experimenter says, "I will be, I'm the experimenter, you must go on." The question is, who would go all the way to the last button, which is 450 volts, danger, severe shock? When Milgram asked a number of people, experts, what percentage of all Americans would go all the way, they said 1%, only sadists. In fact, they couldn't be more wrong. These were psychiatrists who only studied the dispositional orientation. 2/3 went all the way to 450 volts. Now, this was only one study. Milgram actually did 16 different studies. And what you see here is putting a dial on human nature. You can eliminate the effect, or you can make it go over 90%. In study 16, if you see people like you go all the way, 90% of the time, you go all the way. In study 5, if you see people like you rebel against unjust authority, you know what? You rebel. That means we are powerful influences, social models for good or evil. The way we behave influences all the people who observe us. And this is one of the important messages of the study. Women are in study 13, no different from men. How else can good people be seduced into evil deeds? By dehumanizing the victim, mentally making them into animals, less than human. And we know in Rwanda in 1994, the Hutu government went on the radio and said, "Your neighbors, the Tutsis, are cockroaches. Suppose your house was filled with cockroaches. What would you do? You would kill them." They gave every man a machete, every woman a club. In 100 days, they killed 800,000 or more of their neighbors. So the line between good and evil is not an abstraction. It cuts through the heart of every human being. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Russian poet and prisoner in Stalin's Gulag Archipelago, reminded us. And that gets us quickly to the Stanford prison study. We put an ad in the Stanford newspaper, in the city newspaper, but we wanted students in a psychological study of prison life for an experiment that was going to last 2 weeks. 75 people answered the ad. This was not Stanford students, but students in the Bay Area finishing summer school. We gave them personality tests, clinical interviews. We picked 24 who were the most normal, most physically healthy, and then we randomly assigned. Half to be prisoners, half to be guards. The prisoners became numbers, wearing smocks, and the main thing is prisoners were made to feel powerless. The guards are made to feel powerful with symbols of power, with nice uniforms. And the first thing the guards did is say, we need rules that limit the prisoner's freedom. It began just like you saw in Abu Ghraib with menial tasks, push-ups, other things, but it always escalates to more and more degrading, humiliating activities, cleaning toilet bowls out with your bare hands, prisoners stripped naked, and it always goes in the sexual dimension, stripping naked, sexually taunting them, sexually degrading them, again, as you saw in Abu Ghraib. In 36 hours, the first prisoner we selected because he was normal and healthy had an emotional breakdown. And did the guards ease up? No, they got worse. And each day thereafter, I had to release another prisoner until at the end of 6 days, we decided I had to end the study. And later on, I'll tell you who put pressure on me to end it. We have a wonderful website, PrisonEXP or prisonexperiment.org, which has been visited by more than 1 million people in the last 10 years. And you'll be interested to know we have it in Spanish, German, Polish, Italian, Portuguese, and Farsi. So what are the processes that we've learned? I've only mentioned a few of these in my book. I give the evidence for all of these. What are the social processes that grease what I'm calling the slippery slope of evil? Mindlessly taking the first small step, pressing the 15 volts, and taking the small bribe. Dehumanization of others, de-individuation of anonymity of yourself, diffusion of personal responsibility, blind obedience to authority, and doing nothing as the evil of inaction. Most people are not evil, most people are not good, but most people do nothing, and you give permission for evil to exist. So we produce the same effects with social processes as with that secret drug of Dr. Jekyll, turning good people into bad. So we got to oppose the power of evil systems. Everywhere they spread injustice, bullying is an evil, intolerance is an evil, and as you know too well, in Mexico, in my my ancestral home of Sicily, we know all about corruption, and that has to come to an end. And so now help me create new heroes to fight old evils. So what I want to do now is focus on what makes us good. In fact, we know very little about that. We know a lot about evil, and there's almost no research on heroism. So I've given up evil. No more dining in hell for me. I will only promote goodness and goodness and heroism in my new life. So it's time to promote goodness, social justice, moral courage. I want to end on a positive note. Heroism is the antidote to evil. What I'm doing is creating a foundation called the Heroic Imagination Foundation. That means creating a new international educational system that instills in every child the self-belief, I am a hero in waiting. In order to be a big hero, you need war, corruption, all these terrible things. But there's things you could do every day. And it's a self-belief. I will act heroically when my time comes. And while you're waiting, we're going to have a program to make you be a hero in training. My new conception of heroes says we've got to democratize the concept. Anyone can be a hero. We have to demystify it. You don't need special traits. We want to diffuse the concept away from solitary heroes because most effective heroes are heroes who work in networks or teams. Let's look at a few heroes very quickly. Here's a physical hero, the Chinese student who stood in front of a phalanx of tanks saying, please don't hurt us. We're students, we want freedom. And he won. He convinced the tank commander to turn around and go away. So the tank commander was also a hero. Sadly, we have no idea what happened to that young man. He disappeared from the face of the earth. A little Chinese student, Lin Hao, I call a dutiful hero. In May 2008, he and 30 classmates were in an earthquake in Sichuan province where the ceiling collapsed and almost all the children were killed. He got out and he noticed 2 other children were still stuck. He ran in and saved them. And people said, why did you do that? He said, I was the hall monitor. It was my job to look after my classmates. So that's the duty of heroism. Joe Darby also is a dutiful hero. His buddy showed him those horrible pictures, and what he did is he turned them into a senior investigating officer knowing he would be in serious trouble. In fact, he wasn't a hero, he was a hero in hiding. Had to put him, his mother, and his wife in hiding for 3 years because everybody wanted to kill them. Here's a wonderful Polish woman, Irina Sendler. She saved 2,500 Jewish children from sure death by helping them escape the Warsaw Ghetto. And she did it by creating a network of 20 other women. She was captured, tortured, and she never said the names of the kids. Here's a Polish-American heroine who stopped the Stanford prison study, Christina Maslach. She had been my student. We had just started dating. She came down to the study, and she saw the guards abusing the prisoners. I looked up, and I simply said, it's the 10 o'clock toilet run. She told me, it's terrible what you are doing to those boys. They're not prisoners, they're boys. And she said, you have changed. I don't want to continue our relationship if this is the real you. I thought you were kind and caring, but what I see is somebody I don't know. She forced me to acknowledge the cruelty and inhumanity that I was allowing in my role as prison superintendent. And so I ended the study the next day. The question is, what are you going to do with somebody who challenged your authority like that? I married her the next year, and we had 2 lovely daughters, and we lived happily ever after. What about Mexican heroes? There are a great many, of course. Here are 2 classical ones. Miguel Hidalgo. In 1810, he led a group of peasants in a revolt under the banner of the Virgin of Guadalupe. He was captured, executed, but his rebellion was the beginning of the Mexican War of Independence. Saw Juana Inés de la Cruz, born to an unwed mother and growing up in poverty in the 17th century. Her unlikely beginnings were overshadowed by her appetite for knowledge. She became a prolific writer and a poet who entered a convent to continue to pursue her studies. Her work caused an uproar because she wrote about freedom and about women's rights. So my Heroic Imagination project, I'm just going to take a minute and a half, encourages children, families, everyone to develop the heroic imagination, to think of oneself as a hero in waiting, for some situation to provide the catalyst for action on behalf of others or for defending an ideal, a moral principle. Most heroes are ordinary people whose social action is what's extraordinary. They act when others are passive, and they give up egocentrism for sociocentrism. And to be a hero, you have to be aware that it's going to cost you in some way. Heroes transcend the me into the we. And so I want to end with this wonderful story about the most ordinary person in the world who did the most extraordinary thing. His name is Wesley Autry. He's on a subway station in New York. A man falls across the track. There's 75 people who do nothing. He's got a reason not to be involved. He's got his little girls. If he's not successful, they're going to be orphans. But instead, he was successful. He said, I did what anyone could do, and I did what everyone ought to do. That's the moral imperative. And here's It's just a minute and a half, but it's really a very moving presentation. And then I'll end.
On the New York City subway, it's hard enough finding someone who will give up his seat to a stranger, let alone be willing to give up his life for one.
The train was coming in like that.
It happened just 50-year-old Wesley Autry, a construction worker and Navy veteran, was standing on a subway platform with his two little girls when right in front of them, a man started having a seizure.
He kind of stumbled and over his own feet and fall backwards. I see a train coming, but the train is so close, I'm like, what do I do?
Wesley jumped onto the tracks and thought if he could just lie on top of the man, keep him from flailing, maybe the train would roll right over both of them. The clearance was exactly 21 inches. Wesley and the man, 20 and a half.
No way the train can stop before this gentleman could get him up off the tracks. So he covered him with his body and pushed him down to a point where the train wouldn't hit his head and held him down under the tracks while the train came and rolled right over the top of him.
It gave Wesley's children the scare of their young lives.
I thought he was going to get killed.
And Wesley, the scare of his, too.
I'm like talking to him, sir, you can't move. I got two kids up here looking for their father to come back. I don't know you, you don't know me, but listen, don't panic. You know, I'm here to save you.
As for
So our Heroic Imagination Project is exploring and encouraging our inner heroes, giving voice to our nation and your nation's quiet heroes. And so I'm starting a foundation. We're going to do 4 things, and then I'll be finished. We want to create, support, and explore new research on all aspects of heroism. There's almost no research on heroism. So for the graduate students who need a dissertation, this is the area. We also want to encourage the creation of new hero educational curriculum in classes, on the web, in summer camps. We want to develop new hero media, a super website, cartoons, stories, video games. And we want to organize an international encyclopedia of heroes, an open source like Wikipedia with a Google map where you can, every time you click on it has heroes in every city around the world. And we want to have people, we're going to seed it with heroes like you saw, plus many more we have, and have people, this be the Wikipedia of heroes. And so I need your help, Mexico. Muchas gracias.